So as UPS workers vote on their contract, that vote has started. It will end on August 22nd. There is another mass labor action brewing at the United Auto Workers Union, whose master agreement with the three major auto companies, Ford, GM, and Stellantis, which I guess is formerly Chrysler, is set to expire in mid-September, September 14th. Now, the union is demanding double-digit pay raises, an end to tiered employment, and the right to strike over potential future plant closures. So newly elected UAW President Shawn Fain was elected on a reform slate of leaders within the UAW whose campaign slogan was "No corruption, no concessions, and no tiers." So here is a clip of his speech after winning his union race. This is back in March of this year. Here's some rhetoric from UAW President Shawn Fain.
You know, this week I've heard some talk about what we can't do, about what the law says, or about this or that subject of bargaining, and the law has its place. But the UAW wasn't founded by asking for permission.
Sounds Russian to me. This
the
sounds very Russian.
The founders of this union didn't wait for the law. They didn't worry about the law. They wanted their dignity, and they wanted their fair share, and they did what the hell they had to do to get it.
Did Putin interfere in this
union vote? The companies we deal with do not feel bound by the law.
Did he hack the vote?
Ask a Starbucks worker who's been fired for organizing. Ask a Volkswagen worker in Tennessee whose boss threatened to close the plant if they unionized. Employers don't give a damn about breaking the law if it serves their interest. We've got to aspire to the spirit of our union's founders and the sit-down strikers and the civil rights movement. They knew there's no law that can hold back a united working class.
So that sounds like a union leader, right? Kind of a little bit of a throwback.
Kicking it old school, man.
Kicking it old school.
You almost expect him to have a meeting with Rosselli on the side over there.
Right. Exactly. Well, that kind of rhetoric, especially as a potential strike date looms and nears, does not sit well with CNBC's Jim Cramer. And so let's hear Jim Cramer's take on Shawn Fain and why he's getting very, very worried that the rank and file and the auto companies are going to have a bit of a more difficult time reaching an agreement in this case than they did in UPS's case. Let's hear.
Just remember, before we even get into this is the man who called people silly the week before Lehman Brothers collapsed for considering selling the stock. This is the man who called Bankman-Fried the next J.P. Morgan. and this is the man who, in one of the cringiest interviews in the history of interviews, called Elizabeth Holmes the next Steve Jobs.
Exactly.
And he was also pumping Silicon Valley Bank a few days before they collapsed. That was his most recent greatest hits. However, the inverse Cramer, the ETF that is built around doing exactly the opposite of what Jim Cramer says for you to do, is beating the market this year, as it does pretty much every year.
Every time I hear inverse Cramer, I think it's a Seinfeld-inspired sex move. You know, the inverse Cramer.
I would hate to imagine, and so would most Americans, what an inverse Cramer sex move would look like.
Well, luckily we won't have to imagine too much longer because we're going to get back to the content. Let's hear Jim Cramer talking about Shawn Fain.
I want you to compare the labor negotiations here to the ones in auto, where I think there's going to be a strike, and I think it's going to be horrible.
You're making that call
September
today?
14th, I think they're going to strike. Shawn Fain, the guy who runs the UAW, I find him frightening.
And Teamsters UPS didn't give you any solace.
I find him frightening. Yeah, he wants money for his members. He wants his members to have a good life.
Little Kip tribute, as you should.
As you should. Exactly.
As
Teamsters
you
turned
should.
out to be get a good deal.
Let's talk about the
Teamsters
UPS
historically
now.
very powerful union, rich union. But the UAW leader won. There was a very contested vote between the company, the union that wants to work with the autos together.
By the way, his ticket, his slate, that's what they call it in the union races, won every seat. So I don't know. He's saying it was a close vote. I don't know how close it was. I'm sure it was contentious because I'm sure there's a lot of money that goes into the sellout side, right? But
Right.
Sean Fain's slate did very, very well. They won, I think, all 7 seats. I believe I'm right about that. I might not be, but I'm pretty
this
sure that's
is it really is. It's a throwback to when labor actually did something, right? Actually fought for its workers. And again, this was the argument that was used against unions, that they're making American business uncompetitive. You may not remember this. You may know about it. There was this Japan hysteria in the 80s that the Japanese, with their management techniques and their discipline, they were going to just completely dominate us, that they were going to destroy us, that Americans had grown too lazy and the Japanese were just eating our lunch. Symbolically, people lost their minds when a Japanese company bought Rockefeller Center. That was a lot of what what Reagan used to destroy the unions. There was this kind of specifically Japan phobia that was running rampant in the 80s that was really played up in the press. So that was a lot of how we got to where we are now, but it was all bullshit. The American companies were profitable. It's not like these American companies were going bankrupt, but they made it sound that way. They made it sound that was part of how they turned the American public against the unions.
some jobs and give the elder people a good pay. And then this man, Sean, who is just talking about capitalism and the nature of capitalism and how it's really hurt workers. This is very Walter Reuther language. It's the kind of language that when we had in this country, we'll take you down if you don't play ball. That's the language I'm hearing from UAW. Yep. And look, I mean, it's the kind of language where you just say, you know what, we should have built all our EVs in Mexico. It's that bad. I don't think people are paying enough attention. The man is, I'm not saying he's irrational. I'm saying he was elected in order to make it so that there's a very short week to find benefit back. And then the notion that, that we're fat cats. The shareholders are fat cats. And
why would they think that?
He's calling us fat cats.
Why would they think that? What is it? I've got to look up the exact number. I think it's a very small percentage of people who own most of the stocks. And yes, they're fucking fat cats.
Of course you're fat.
Like you, Jim.
Like you. Look where you're sitting. Well, you want to go fucking make a car? You're sitting there in an air-conditioned studio in your fancy suit, betting on companies to succeed and fail. Even if you weren't on TV, you'd be making 20 times in a year what these people who bust their asses 50 hours a week make in the middle of the country making the fucking cars. And he's saying, well, this is why we should have just made all EVs in Mexico. Could you believe that? I mean, could you believe that? It's incredible. It's just absolutely...
This is the kind of talk that you heard before American towns were meth-addicted hellholes.
Right, exactly. That's what he's talking about. This is another version of the Patrick Bet-David thing, although this is on TV. Here we go.
Rewarded. We haven't seen this. He's class warfare. And it's very shocking to hear class warfare.
I remember.
Very shocking to hear class warfare. Not shocking at all. It's shocking for you to hear it directed at you. It's shocking for rich people to hear poor and working class people demand more of them. Yeah, I can understand you being shocked by that because you don't hear it very often. But the workers have heard a whole lot of class warfare for their whole lives, and they've felt it too. They haven't just heard it.
Hey, Warren Buffett said it. He said, sure, there's a class war, and it's my side that's winning it.
Yes, our class is winning. Our class is winning.
Jim Cramer a while ago, who lamented the shift from capital to labor. I'm sorry, from labor to capital over the last 30 years.
Well, I always felt that the middle class benefited from unions. I've been a union member, twice union member, and I always felt that.
What union you from? The International Brotherhood of Functioning Alcoholics? That's the Jim Cramer's union. It's probably from some like performance union, like AFTRA or something like that. When you go on TV, you probably have to join some showbiz union. Is probably what I would imagine.
Those are the unions he would be in.
Yeah, exactly.
Work together.
I'm surprised he's not out on strike.
Do well.
Scab. He's a scab.
I never felt that we had to destroy the people that we were.
Union.
It's probably a different one. Yeah. No, he's not an actor.
There's a
broadcaster or something like that. Some showbiz union. I'm sure that's what he's talking about.
Were fighting. I was part of a J.P. Stevens. It was at one point a great textile company. Stoppage. Tried to block them. And they went under, and I've always regretted that I was part of that, because J.P. Stevens, we didn't want them to go under. We wanted them to, it was like Bond.
I would really like to know the details here. What do you mean you were involved in a strike in a textile union? You were making rugs? Like what? In what capacity were you involved in this strike? Because I can't imagine you were involved in any textile union.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know. For sure.
Yeah, he doesn't get into any details here. We've got to do. I'm going to make it my business to research this.
To figure that out.
What the fuck is he talking about? But this is what I mean. This is how they destroyed unions in the first place. Look at what he's doing. He's not saying it straight out, but he's saying basically, well, if you ask for too much from these companies, they're going to go bankrupt. Right. These companies are sitting on hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in some cases, and we're living in a world where CEO pay is 500 times what a worker pay is. There's plenty of money in the system. It's just a question of how you distribute it.
Of course.
We just wanted them to talk. We didn't want them to die. And so I'm always very reluctant to see.
Well, unions wouldn't be so militant if they weren't getting fucked so hard, right? In the bygone era when workers could support themselves, they didn't want to take the company down because they felt that the relationship was working for them, right? When you completely destroy that, of course there's going to be more labor militancy once we can generate the momentum to actually get that in action, in motion, right? Which we're starting to see now.
The union use such language that makes it feel like that it's zero sum. But I am pro-union because the unions, in the way that Ronald Reagan was pro-union, it's like, you want people to do
pro-union. That should be a soundtrack.
Ronald Reagan's entire presidency was an assault on unions.
His presidency is defined as an assault on unions.
And so his opening pitch was to fire the air traffic controllers.
Yeah,
it's one of the things he's most known for.
Exactly. Most notorious union buster in the history of the White House.
We're reluctant to see a union use such language that makes it feel like that it's zero sum. But I am pro-union because the unions, in the way that Ronald Reagan was pro-union, it's like, you want people to do well.
You want people to do well.
How do you even say that?
I'm pro-union in the way Ronald Reagan was pro-union. Amazing. That is an all-time classic Jim Cramer segment. There are a lot of classic Cramer segments. That's one of them. That's on the Mount Rushmore of classic Cramer. I'm pro-union in the way that Ronald Reagan was pro-union.
We do need to pull that for a soundtrack.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, now you can see.
I'm kosher in the way that Tony Soprano was kosher.
Only occasional cup of cola.
Please clap.